The morning bell chimed across the crystalline towers of the Galactic Academy, its harmonic frequency designed to penetrate the auditory ranges of 47 different species. As students from across the galaxy hurried through the translucent corridors, their various forms creating a living rainbow of diversity, one figure moved with quiet purpose through the crowd. Marcus Chen adjusted his simple gray uniform and pulled his hood slightly forward, casting shadows across his unremarkable human features. To his fellow students, he was just another quiet academic, perhaps studying xenobiology or stellar cartography like so many others who preferred solitude to the boisterous social clusters that formed naturally among the Academy's population. The Zephyrian twins, Kayla and Nex, floated past him on gossamer wings, their crystalline voices discussing the upcoming tactical simulation exercises. Their conversation was typical of the Academy's elite students, filled with theoretical knowledge and academic confidence that came from lives of privilege and preparation. The human fleets have been struggling with the Void Hunters for months now. Kayla's melodic voice carried clearly through the corridor. Perhaps it's time for more evolved species to take the lead in galactic defense. Nex's agreement hummed through the air like wind chimes. Their primitive approach to warfare is holding back the entire coalition. All brute force and no elegance. Marcus said nothing, his expression remaining neutral as he continued past them toward the Advanced Strategic Studies lecture hall. His silence wasn't born of shyness or lack of knowledge. It came from something far more complex, a weight that settled on his shoulders every morning when he woke in his sparse dormitory room. Professor Valdris, a towering Corinthian with skin like polished obsidian, was already arranging holographic displays when Marcus entered the lecture hall. The professor's four arms moved in perfect coordination, manipulating star charts and fleet formations with the precision of someone who had studied galactic warfare for centuries, but never actually fought in it. Today we examine the Battle of Kepler's Edge, Valdris announced as students filed in, taking their seats in the amphitheater-style classroom. A textbook example of how superior firepower without tactical finesse leads to Pyrrhic victories. Marcus slid into his usual seat in the back corner, where the shadows were deepest and attention was least likely to fall on him. Around him, students from dozens of worlds pulled out their data tablets and recording devices, eager to absorb the professor's wisdom about military strategy. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the Kepler system in perfect detail. Planets hung suspended in miniature space, while tiny representations of human and alien fleets moved through their predetermined positions like actors in a play that had already been written. The human fleet, under Admiral Sarah Chen, achieved victory through overwhelming force, Valdris continued, his voice carrying the dismissive tone that many Academy instructors used when discussing human military tactics. However, the casualties were enormous. 30% fleet losses for what should have been a simple engagement. Marcus's hands remained steady on his desk, but something flickered behind his eyes. Several students nodded in agreement with the professor's assessment, their various forms of heads bobbing or oscillating according to their species' customs. Zexhai, a reptilian saurian with scales that shifted color with his emotions, raised one clawed hand. Professor, couldn't the humans have used a pincer movement to minimize their losses? Even basic tactical theory would suggest. Indeed, Valdris replied, manipulating the hologram to show alternative fleet positions. The human tendency toward direct assault continues to puzzle military scholars. Perhaps it's a species trait, this preference for the straightforward approach over more sophisticated strategies. The lecture continued for another hour, with Valdris dissecting every decision made during the battle, with the clinical precision of someone who had never felt the weight of command or the pressure of making life-and-death decisions with incomplete information, and enemy fire lighting up the void around his ship. When the class finally ended, students began filing out in small groups, their conversations continuing the themes from the lecture. Marcus remained in his seat, waiting for the crowd to thin before making his own exit. This was his pattern, his way of avoiding the social interactions that might lead to questions he couldn't answer honestly. As he finally stood to leave, a small data pad slipped from his bag and clattered to the floor. Before he could retrieve it, Lyra, a Celestian exchange student with skin that glowed faintly blue, picked it up and glanced at the screen. Her large, opalescent eyes widened slightly as she saw the display. Technical schematics for ship modifications, tactical analysis notes, and what appeared to be classified fleet communication protocols scrolled across the screen in neat, precise handwriting. "This is quite advanced material," she said softly, her voice carrying the musical quality common to her species. "Are you studying military engineering?" Marcus quickly took the pad from her, his movements carefully controlled despite the spike of adrenaline he felt. "Just personal research," he replied quietly. "Thank you." Lyra studied his face for a moment, her alien features expressing curiosity that transcended species barriers. "You never speak up in class, but your notes suggest you know more about these topics than most of our instructors." "I prefer to listen," Marcus said, shouldering his bag and moving toward the exit. "There's usually more to learn that way." As he walked away, Lyra remained standing in the empty classroom, her mind processing the brief glimpse she'd had of his notes. The technical specifications she'd seen weren't the kind of thing a student would have access to, and the tactical analyses showed a depth of understanding that came from experience rather than theory. Marcus made his way through the academy's corridors with the same quiet purpose he'd shown that morning. But now there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Maintaining his cover at the academy required constant vigilance, and moments like the one with Lyra were dangerous cracks in the carefully constructed facade he'd built around himself. In his dormitory room that night, Marcus stood before a small mirror and looked at his reflection. The face that stared back at him was younger than his 35 years would suggest, a benefit of modern medical technology and the fact that space combat had a way of aging people from the inside out rather than the outside in. But his eyes held depths that no student should possess. Memories of battles fought in the dark between stars, of decisions that had saved worlds and cost lives, of innovations born from desperation and necessity rather than academic theory. Tomorrow there would be another lecture, another opportunity to sit in silence while professors who had never commanded anything larger than a classroom discussed the failures and successes of the human fleet, and Marcus would continue to say nothing, to be nobody, to let the galaxy's future leaders form their opinions about humanity's military capabilities based on incomplete information and academic prejudice. It was, after all, exactly what Admiral Sarah Chen had sent him here to accomplish. The simulation chamber hummed with energy as dozens of species gathered for the Academy's most challenging exercise. Virtual reality pods lined the circular room like sleeping giants, each one capable of recreating the sensory experience of commanding a starship in battle. Today's scenario was based on the recent Void Hunter incursions that had been terrorizing the Outer Rim colonies. Marcus stood in line with his assigned team, watching as other students chatted excitedly about their strategies. His team consisted of Thyra, a methodical Minervan whose crystalline thought processes made her excellent at logistics; Jorik, a passionate Ursine warrior whose species prized honor above tactical flexibility; and Vex, a calculating Nexari whose multiple brain lobes allowed him to process complex battle scenarios with machine-like precision. "Remember," Instructor Kalen announced, his metallic voice echoing through the chamber, "you will be commanding a standard coalition patrol fleet. 3 cruisers, 6 destroyers, and 12 frigates. Your mission is to protect the civilian evacuation from Sigma Centauri while holding off a Void Hunter raiding force of unknown size." Thyra's faceted features reflected the chamber's lights as she turned to her teammates. "Standard formation should suffice. We establish a defensive perimeter around the evacuation ships and engage any threats that penetrate our lines." Jorik's massive frame shifted impatiently. "The Void Hunters are raiders, not warriors. They'll flee when they encounter real resistance. We should pursue and eliminate them completely." Vex's tentacles writhed slightly as he processed multiple scenarios. Probability matrices suggest a layered defense with emphasis on long-range engagement. Void Hunter ships excel at close combat and boarding actions. Marcus listened to his teammates debate strategy while keeping his expression neutral. The Void Hunters weren't just raiders, as Jorik suggested, nor would they be deterred by a simple defensive formation as Thyra believed. They were something far more dangerous, something that most of the galaxy's military academies didn't truly understand because they hadn't faced them in real combat. "What do you think, Marcus?" Thyra asked, her crystalline voice carrying genuine curiosity. "You've been quiet during our planning sessions." All eyes turned to him and Marcus felt the familiar weight of maintaining his cover. "I think we should adapt our strategy based on what we encounter," he said carefully. "The Void Hunters are unpredictable." It was a safe answer, the kind that any cautious student might give. It also happened to be true, though not for the reasons his teammates would assume. They entered their respective pods, and Marcus felt the familiar sensation of neural interface connecting to the simulation network. Suddenly he was standing on the bridge of a coalition cruiser, surrounded by holographic displays showing fleet positions and sensor readings. The artificial bridge crew looked to him expectantly, waiting for orders. The evacuation was already underway when the exercise began. Hundreds of civilian transports moved through space like a slow-moving river of light, carrying refugees from a colony world that intelligence suggested was next on the Void Hunters' target list. Marcus's team had positioned their fleet in a standard defensive formation, creating overlapping fields of fire around the evacuation route. "Contact," Vex announced over the team communication channel. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace at Vector 77 Mark 12. The tactical display lit up with red icons as Void Hunter ships materialized at the edge of the system. Marcus counted them quickly: 2 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, and 8 smaller attack craft. It was a standard raiding formation designed for quick strikes against lightly defended targets. "They're moving to intercept the evacuation convoy," Thera reported, "adjusting defensive positions to—" "Wait," Marcus said quietly, his eyes studying the enemy formation with practiced intensity. Something was wrong. The Void Hunters were approaching too directly, too obviously. "Pull back the forward destroyers." "That will create gaps in our coverage," Jorik protested. "We need to show strength to discourage their attack." Marcus watched the enemy ships continue their approach, his mind automatically running tactical calculations that had been burned into his memory through real combat experience. The Void Hunters weren't raiders who would be easily discouraged. They were hunters, and they had adapted their tactics based on studying coalition defensive patterns. "Thyra, can you scan for hyperspace distortions behind us?" he asked. "Behind us?" Her confusion was evident in her voice. "The threat is clearly in front of our formation." "Please," Marcus said, his tone carrying quiet urgency. "Check our rear quadrants." The sensor sweep took 30 seconds. When the results appeared on the tactical display, a chill ran through the team communication channel. 3 more Void Hunter ships had been detected moving through hyperspace, positioned to emerge directly behind the evacuation fleet. "It's a pincer movement," Vex said, his multiple brain lobes processing the implications rapidly. "The forward group is bait to draw our defenses out of position." Marcus was already moving before his teammates fully grasped the situation. "Jorik, take half the destroyers and establish a rear guard around the civilians. Thera, redirect the frigates to create overlapping sensor nets. Vex, prepare the cruisers for rapid position changes." "You're giving orders," Thyra observed, though her tone carried curiosity rather than challenge. "Who designated you as fleet commander?" It was a valid question, and one that Marcus couldn't answer honestly. In the real battle of Sigma Centauri, he had been the fleet commander. He had been the one to recognize the Void Hunter pincer strategy and adapt coalition tactics to counter it. But here in this simulation, he was supposed to be just another student. "Sorry," he said, moderating his tone. "Those were suggestions, not orders. What do you think?" The battle that followed tested every skill the team possessed. The Void Hunter's rear attack materialized exactly as Marcus had predicted, forcing the coalition fleet to fight on 2 fronts while protecting helpless civilian ships. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a massacre, but Marcus's quiet guidance kept the team coordinated. When Jorik's warrior instincts drove him to charge the enemy cruisers, Marcus suggested flanking maneuvers that minimized casualties. When Thyra's logical approach became too rigid to adapt to changing conditions, he offered alternative formations that maintained their defensive integrity while allowing for tactical flexibility. Most importantly, when Vex's calculations suggested abandoning part of the civilian fleet to save the rest, Marcus found solutions that protected everyone. The exercise ended with complete evacuation success and minimal military casualties. As the team emerged from their simulation pods, other students gathered around them with congratulations and questions about their tactics. "That was incredible," Lyra said, her blue skin glowing brighter with excitement. "I watched your team's performance from the observation deck. How did you predict the rear attack? Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him, students and instructors alike waiting for his explanation. Around the chamber, other teams were discussing their own results, most of which had ended in partial civilian losses or heavy military casualties. Pattern recognition, he said finally. The Void Hunter's approach seemed too straightforward for raiders who usually rely on surprise attacks. Instructor Kalen approached their group, his metallic features unreadable. Cadet Chen, your team's performance was exceptional. The tactical innovations you employed suggest advanced understanding of Void Hunter combat doctrine. We worked well as a team, Marcus replied, deflecting the attention to his teammates. Everyone contributed to our success. But as the students dispersed to their next classes, Marcus noticed Lyra hanging back, her opalescent eyes studying him with growing curiosity. The Celestian exchange student had been watching him carefully since their encounter after Professor Valdris's lecture, and her expression suggested she was beginning to piece together information that could prove dangerous to his cover. That evening, as Marcus reviewed his performance in the simulation, he realized that maintaining his facade was becoming increasingly difficult. His instincts, honed by years of real combat command, were too strong to completely suppress. Every tactical situation triggered responses that went far beyond what any academy student should possess. But the mission Admiral Chen had given him was too important to abandon now. The Galactic community needed to understand human capabilities accurately, without the prejudice and misunderstanding that currently shaped their opinions. And that meant Marcus had to continue being nobody special, just another quiet student in a sea of future leaders, even if it meant watching his own brilliant tactical innovations being analyzed and criticized by professors who had never faced the reality of war among the stars. The Academy's grand library stretched across 3 levels, its crystalline shelves holding the collected knowledge of 1,000 worlds. Holographic displays flickered between the physical archives, creating a maze of information that could overwhelm even the most dedicated scholar. Marcus had found a secluded corner on the upper level where few students ventured, surrounded by ancient texts on military history that most considered outdated in the age of digital warfare. He wasn't reading for pleasure. Every evening after classes, Marcus came here to study the official records of battles he had fought, analyzing how history was being written about events he had lived through. It was a surreal experience, reading academic interpretations of his own tactical decisions, seeing his innovations credited to other commanders or dismissed as lucky accidents. Tonight he was reviewing the archived reports from the Titan's Gate campaign, a series of battles where human forces had successfully defended a critical hyperspace junction against overwhelming odds. The official coalition records painted it as a grinding victory achieved through superior numbers and resources, typical of how the Galactic community viewed human military capabilities. They had no idea that the real advantage had come from a revolutionary approach to fleet coordination that Marcus had developed during the siege. While enemy forces expected traditional formations and predictable tactics, human ships had begun operating with a fluidity that confounded their opponents. Individual captains were given broad objectives and allowed to adapt their methods in real time, creating an organic command structure that could respond to changing conditions faster than any centralized system. Fascinating reading material for a student. Marcus looked up to find Lyra approaching his table, her luminescent skin casting a soft blue glow across the ancient books. She moved with the grace common to her species, but her eyes held an intelligence that had clearly been focused on him for some time. Military history helps put current events in perspective, Marcus replied, closing the text carefully. Understanding how past commanders solved problems can provide insights for future challenges. Lyra settled into the chair across from him, her movements deliberate and unhurried. I've been thinking about our simulation exercise. Your tactical suggestions were remarkably sophisticated for someone studying general xenobiology. Marcus felt the familiar spike of caution that came whenever someone began asking pointed questions about his background. I have broad interests, he said. The Academy encourages interdisciplinary learning. Indeed it does, Lyra agreed, her melodic voice carrying undertones that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by his casual explanation. Though I notice you seem particularly knowledgeable about human fleet tactics, almost as if you've studied them extensively. The conversation was moving into dangerous territory, and Marcus needed to redirect it without arousing further suspicion. Human military doctrine is well documented, he said. Most of it is available in the public archives. True, Lyra said, leaning forward slightly. But public archives don't usually contain the kind of technical specifications I glimpsed on your datapad. Ship modification protocols, classified communication frequencies, tactical analysis that reads more like first-hand experience than academic study. Marcus maintained his calm expression, but internally he was evaluating options. Lyra was clearly more observant than most students, and her questions were becoming increasingly direct. He could deflect again, make excuses, perhaps even claim the materials were part of a research project. But the Celestian's intelligent gaze suggested she would see through obvious deceptions. "You're very observant," he said finally. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Lyra replied. "I'm asking directly. Who are you really, Marcus Chen?" Before Marcus could respond, the library's quiet atmosphere was shattered by an emergency alert that echoed through the Academy's communication system. The melodic tones that usually announced class schedules or administrative updates were replaced by urgent, discordant notes that made every student look up from their studies. "All students report to designated emergency stations immediately," the announcement echoed through the vast library. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Around them, students began moving toward the exits with the controlled urgency that came from regular emergency drills. But Marcus recognized something in the alert pattern that most others would miss. The frequency modulation contained coded information that indicated this wasn't a training exercise designed to test Academy protocols. "What do you think it is?" Lyra asked as they joined the stream of students moving toward the emergency stations. Marcus's mind was already analyzing possibilities based on his knowledge of current galactic situations. "Probably a raid alert," he said. "The outer colonies have been reporting increased Void Hunter activity. They reached the central assembly hall where students were gathering according to their designated groups. Academy instructors moved among the crowd with calm efficiency, but Marcus could see the tension in their movements. Whatever was happening, it had the faculty concerned. Director Zalon, the Academy's highest authority, appeared on the central holographic display. The ancient ethereal's normally serene features showed strain that transcended species boundaries. "Students and faculty," Zalon began, his telepathic voice resonating directly in everyone's minds, "we have received urgent communication from the Coalition Defense Command. The Void Hunters have launched coordinated attacks on 3 major systems simultaneously. Among the targets is the Kepler Defense Station." A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. Kepler Station was one of the Coalition's most important strategic installations, protecting the hyperspace routes that connected the core worlds to the outer colonies. If it fell, entire systems would be cut off from mutual support. "The Coalition fleet is responding," Director Zalon continued, "but the scale of the attacks has stretched our defensive capabilities. We have been asked to prepare Academy resources for potential emergency deployment." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Academy's climate control systems. The scenario Director Zalon was describing was worse than most students realized. A coordinated 3-front attack meant the Void Hunters had evolved beyond random raiding into something approaching strategic warfare. And if they were targeting critical infrastructure like Kepler Station, they had intelligence about Coalition defensive capabilities that should have been impossible for them to obtain. Senior students with tactical specializations will be briefed on potential support roles, the director announced. All others will continue regular schedules with enhanced security protocols in effect. As the assembly broke up, Marcus found himself walking alongside Lyra toward the tactical briefing area. Her presence reminded him that their conversation had been interrupted at a critical moment, and her earlier questions about his identity were still unresolved. "You don't seem surprised by any of this," she observed as they moved through the corridors. "Surprised by what specifically?" Marcus asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. "Most students are talking about how unexpected this attack is," Lyra said, "but you look like someone who's been expecting something like this for a while." She was right, though Marcus couldn't explain that his expectations were based on classified intelligence reports and strategic analyses that no Academy student should have access to. The Void Hunters' recent behavior patterns had been indicating a shift toward more organized operations, and the targets of tonight's attack suggested they had specific, strategic objectives rather than just opportunistic. Rating goals. The tactical briefing room was filled with senior students from various military specializations. Professor Valdris stood at the front of the room, his obsidian features reflecting the holographic displays that showed real-time battle reports from the 3 attack sites. "The situation is developing rapidly," Valdris announced. "We're receiving fragmentary reports from all 3 theaters, but the pattern suggests coordinated operations with specific strategic objectives." The holographic displays showed tactical situations that made Marcus's blood run cold. The Void Hunters weren't just attacking with superior numbers. They were employing tactics that suggested detailed knowledge of coalition defensive protocols. They knew exactly where to strike to maximize damage while minimizing their own losses. "Kepler Station is holding for now," Valdris continued, "but intelligence suggests the main attack hasn't begun yet. What we're seeing appears to be probing actions designed to test defensive responses." Marcus studied the tactical displays with growing concern. If the Void Hunters were conducting reconnaissance in force, it meant they were planning something much larger than individual system raids. The question was whether the Coalition's military leadership recognized the true scope of what they were facing. As the briefing continued, Marcus realized that his carefully maintained cover at the Academy was about to face its greatest test. The emerging crisis would demand responses that went far beyond what any student should be capable of providing. But if the Coalition was going to survive what appeared to be a systematic campaign by an enemy that understood their weaknesses, the question was whether the galaxy was ready to learn that their supposedly primitive human allies had capabilities that went far beyond anything their academic theories suggested. The tactical analysis chamber hummed with concentrated energy as teams of students and faculty worked around the clock to develop new approaches to fighting the Void Hunters. Holographic displays showed experimental formations and theoretical engagement scenarios, while dozens of brilliant minds from across the galaxy attempted to think beyond the conventional wisdom that had served the Coalition for centuries. Marcus sat at a workstation in the corner, officially assigned to communications monitoring, but actually developing tactical innovations that drew on years of real combat experience. His fingers moved across the interface with practiced efficiency, creating formation diagrams and strategic analyses that he carefully attributed to theoretical research rather than battlefield knowledge. 3 days had passed since Admiral Chen's urgent communication, and the situation across the galaxy continued to deteriorate. The Void Hunters had withdrawn from their initial targets, but not before demonstrating their ability to predict and counter every standard Coalition response. Reports from the affected systems painted a picture of an enemy that seemed to know what the Coalition would do before they did it themselves. "Marcus, can you review this formation analysis?" He looked up to find Lyra approaching his workstation, carrying a data tablet that displayed one of the experimental tactical configurations being developed by the Academy teams. Her luminescent features showed the exhaustion that had settled over everyone involved in the emergency effort, but her eyes remained sharp with intelligence and growing suspicion. "What specific aspect concerns you?" he asked, accepting the tablet and scanning the formation details quickly. "The coordination requirements," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "This formation assumes a level of real-time communication and adaptive response that exceeds anything in Coalition doctrine. The individual ship commanders would need to make independent tactical decisions while maintaining formation integrity. It's theoretically brilliant but practically impossible unless..." "Unless what?" Marcus asked, though he suspected where her analysis was leading. "Unless you've actually seen it work in combat," Lyra finished, her opalescent eyes studying his face intently. "This isn't theoretical innovation, Marcus. This is documentation of existing tactics." Marcus set down the tablet carefully, weighing his response. Around them, other students continued their frantic work, unaware that their conversation was approaching the moment he had been dreading since arriving at the Academy. "You're suggesting I have combat experience," he said, quietly. "I'm not suggesting anything anymore," Lyra replied. "I'm stating facts. Your tactical analyses show practical knowledge that only comes from command experience. Your technical specifications match classified military protocols, and your insights into Void Hunter behavior demonstrate understanding that goes far beyond academic study." Before Marcus could respond, an urgent alarm echoed through the analysis chamber. Emergency lights bathed the room in amber illumination as Director Zalon's telepathic voice resonated in everyone's minds. All personnel to emergency stations. The Academy is under direct attack. The chamber erupted into controlled chaos as students and faculty moved toward designated positions. Through the massive viewports that lined one wall, Marcus could see the crystalline towers of the Academy's outer structures beginning to glow with defensive energy fields. "How is that possible?" one of the faculty members called out. "The Academy's location is classified. We're protected by multiple defensive systems." Marcus was already moving toward the tactical displays, his training overriding the need to maintain his cover. The sensor readings showed a small but sophisticated force of Void Hunter ships approaching through a hyperspace corridor that should have been impossible to navigate without detailed knowledge of the Academy's location. "They're not here to destroy the Academy," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber with sudden authority. "This is an extraction operation." "Extraction of what?" Commander Thex demanded as he emerged from the central command station. Marcus studied the attack formation with growing certainty. "Information. They're here to capture someone who has access to Coalition tactical development." The implication hung in the air for a moment before Lyra spoke up from her position at the communications console. "They're here for you, aren't they? Whoever you really are." All eyes in the chamber turned toward Marcus, and he realized that the moment for maintaining his cover had finally passed. The mission Admiral Chen had given him, to remain anonymous, while studying galactic perceptions of human capabilities, was about to collide with a more immediate need to defend the Academy and everyone in it. "Commander Thex," he said, his voice taking on the tone of someone accustomed to giving orders rather than following them. "We need to evacuate all non-essential personnel and prepare the Academy's defensive systems for a siege." "Cadet Chen," Thex replied with growing suspicion, "you're speaking as if you have authority to issue tactical directives." Marcus looked around the chamber at the faces of students and faculty who had come to trust his quiet presence among them. Then he made the decision that would change everything. "Because I do have that authority," he said clearly. "My name is Marcus Chen and my rank is Fleet Admiral. I've been operating under deep cover at this Academy on direct orders from Coalition High Command." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sounds of the Academy's defensive systems engaging the attacking Void Hunter ships. Marcus could see shock, confusion, and in some cases betrayal in the expressions around him. Fleet Admiral Chen, Director Zalon's telepathic voice carried new understanding. The architect of the Titan's Gate defense and the Kepler innovations. Among other things, Marcus confirmed. "But right now the important point is that the Void Hunters have somehow learned my identity and location. They're here to capture me because they believe I represent the key to understanding human tactical capabilities." "Do you?" Lyra asked, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and accusation. Marcus activated his command codes on the nearest tactical console, bringing up displays that showed his real service record and command history. The holographic data painted a picture of someone who had been involved in every major human military innovation of the past decade. "The Void Hunters aren't wrong," he admitted. "Much of what they've been studying and adapting comes from tactical concepts I developed during our campaigns against them. They've been analyzing my command decisions, learning my patterns, developing counters to my strategies, and now they want the source," Commander Thex said, his understanding of the situation crystallizing. "Which means this Academy and everyone in it has become a target," Marcus replied. "But it also means we have an opportunity. They've made a mistake by coming here directly, instead of continuing their systematic analysis from a distance." The tactical displays updated with new information about the attacking force. Marcus studied the data with the practiced eye of someone who had fought these enemies before, seeing patterns that others would miss. "They're confident," he observed. "Too confident. This formation assumes they're facing standard Academy defenses and inexperienced personnel." "What are you suggesting?" Director Zalon asked. Marcus turned to face the assembled group, his expression carrying the weight of command decisions that could affect not just the Academy, but the entire galactic situation. "I'm suggesting we show them what happens when they try to capture someone who's been studying them just as intensively as they've been studying us," he said. "But it's going to require everyone here to trust tactics that go against everything you've learned about conventional warfare." Lyra stepped forward, her luminescent features reflecting determination that transcended species boundaries. What do you need us to do? Marcus looked at the faces around him, students and faculty from dozens of worlds who had just learned that their quiet classmate was actually one of the Coalition's most important military leaders. The trust they were offering despite his deception was both humbling and terrifying. "Help me turn this academy into a trap," he said, "and pray that we can spring it before the Void Hunters realize they're not hunting prey anymore." Outside the viewports, the first exchange of fire between Academy defenses and Void Hunter ships lit up the darkness between stars, marking the beginning of a battle that would determine whether Marcus Chen's true identity would become a weapon in enemy hands, or the key to finally turning the tide against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. The tactical analysis chamber hummed with concentrated energy as teams of students and faculty worked around the clock to develop new approaches to fighting the Void Hunters. Holographic displays showed experimental formations and theoretical engagement scenarios, while dozens of brilliant minds from across the galaxy attempted to think beyond the conventional wisdom that had served the Coalition for centuries. Marcus sat at a workstation in the corner, officially assigned to communications monitoring, but actually developing tactical innovations that drew on years of real combat experience. His fingers moved across the interface with practiced efficiency, creating formation diagrams and strategic analyses that he carefully attributed to theoretical research rather than battlefield knowledge. 3 days had passed since Admiral Chen's urgent communication, and the situation across the galaxy continued to deteriorate. The Void Hunters had withdrawn from their initial targets, but not before demonstrating their ability to predict and counter every standard Coalition response. Reports from the affected systems painted a picture of an enemy that seemed to know what the Coalition would do before they did it themselves. "Marcus, can you review this formation analysis?" He looked up to find Lyra approaching his workstation, carrying a data tablet that displayed one of the experimental tactical configurations being developed by the Academy teams. Her luminescent features showed the exhaustion that had settled over everyone involved in the emergency effort, but her eyes remained sharp with intelligence and growing suspicion. "What specific aspect concerns you?" he asked, accepting the tablet and scanning the formation details quickly. "The coordination requirements," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "This formation assumes a level of real-time communication and adaptive response that exceeds anything in Coalition doctrine. The individual ship commanders would need to make independent tactical decisions while maintaining formation integrity. It's theoretically brilliant, but practically impossible unless what?" Marcus asked, though he suspected where her analysis was leading. "Unless you've actually seen it work in combat," Lyra finished, her opalescent eyes studying his face intently. "This isn't theoretical innovation, Marcus. This is documentation of existing tactics." Marcus set down the tablet carefully, weighing his response. Around them, other students continued their frantic work, unaware that their conversation was approaching. The moment he had been dreading since arriving at the Academy. "You're suggesting I have combat experience," he said, quietly. "I'm not suggesting anything anymore," Lyra replied. "I'm stating facts. Your tactical analyses show practical knowledge that only comes from command experience. Your technical specifications match classified military protocols, and your insights into Void Hunter behavior demonstrate understanding that goes far beyond academic study." Before Marcus could respond, an urgent alarm echoed through the analysis chamber. Emergency lights bathed the room in amber illumination, as Director Zalon's telepathic voice resonated in everyone's minds. "All personnel to emergency stations. The Academy is under direct attack." The chamber erupted into controlled chaos as students and faculty moved toward designated positions. Through the massive viewports that lined one wall, Marcus could see the crystalline towers of the Academy's outer structures beginning to glow with defensive energy fields. "How is that possible?" one of the faculty members called out. "The Academy's location is classified. We're protected by multiple defensive systems." Marcus was already moving toward the tactical displays, his training overriding the need to maintain his cover. The sensor readings showed a small but sophisticated force of Void Hunter ships approaching through a hyperspace corridor that should have been impossible to navigate without detailed knowledge of the Academy's location. "They're not here to destroy the Academy," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber with sudden authority. "This is an extraction operation." "Extraction of what?" Commander Thex demanded as he emerged from the central command station. Marcus studied the attack formation with growing certainty. Information. They're here to capture someone who has access to Coalition tactical development. The implication hung in the air for a moment, before Lyra spoke up from her position at the communications console. They're here for you, aren't they? Whoever you really are. All eyes in the chamber turned toward Marcus, and he realized that the moment for maintaining his cover had finally passed. The mission Admiral Chen had given him, to remain anonymous, while studying galactic perceptions of human capabilities, was about to collide with a more immediate need to defend the Academy and everyone in it. Commander Thex, he said, his voice taking on the tone of someone accustomed to giving orders rather than following them. We need to evacuate all non-essential personnel and prepare the Academy's defensive systems for a siege. Cadet Chen, Thex replied with growing suspicion. You're speaking as if you have authority to issue tactical directives. Marcus looked around the chamber at the faces of students and faculty who had come to trust his quiet presence among them. Then he made the decision that would change everything. Because I do have that authority, he said clearly. My name is Marcus Chen, and my rank is Fleet Admiral. I've been operating under deep cover at this academy on direct orders from Coalition High Command. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sounds of the Academy's defensive systems engaging the attacking Void Hunter ships. Marcus could see shock, confusion, and in some cases betrayal in the expressions around him. Fleet Admiral Chen, Director Zalon's telepathic voice carried new understanding. The architect of the Titan's Gate defense and the Kepler innovations. Among other things, Marcus confirmed. But right now, the important point is that the Void Hunters have somehow learned my identity and location. They're here to capture me because they believe I represent the key to understanding human tactical capabilities. Do you? Lyra asked, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and accusation. Marcus activated his command codes on the nearest tactical console, bringing up displays that showed his real service record and command history. The holographic data painted a picture of someone who had been involved in every major human military innovation of the past decade. The Void Hunters aren't wrong, he admitted. Much of what they've been studying and adapting comes from tactical concepts I developed during our campaigns against them. They've been analyzing my command decisions, learning my patterns, developing counters to my strategies, and now they want the source, Commander Thex said, his understanding of the situation crystallizing. Which means this academy and everyone in it has become a target, Marcus replied. But it also means we have an opportunity. They've made a mistake by coming here directly instead of continuing their systematic analysis from a distance. The tactical displays updated with new information about the attacking force. Marcus studied the data with the practiced eye of someone who had fought these enemies before, seeing patterns that others would miss. They're confident, he observed. Too confident. This formation assumes they're facing standard academy defenses and inexperienced personnel. What are you suggesting? Director Zalon asked. Marcus turned to face the assembled group, his expression carrying the weight of command decisions that could affect not just the academy, but the entire galactic situation. I'm suggesting we show them what happens when they try to capture someone who's been studying them just as intensively as they've been studying us, he said. But it's going to require everyone here to trust tactics that go against everything you've learned about conventional warfare. Lyra stepped forward, her luminescent features reflecting determination that transcended species boundaries. What do you need us to do? Marcus looked at the faces around him, students and faculty from dozens of worlds who had just learned that their quiet classmate was actually one of the Coalition's most important military leaders. The trust they were offering despite his deception was both humbling and terrifying. Help me turn this academy into a trap, he said, and pray that we can spring it before the Void Hunters realize they're not hunting prey anymore. Outside the viewports, the first exchange of fire between Academy defenses and Void Hunter ships lit up the darkness between stars, marking the beginning of a battle that would determine whether Marcus Chen's true identity would become a weapon in enemy hands or the key to finally turning the tide against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. The Academy's defensive grid blazed with energy as Void Hunter ships pressed their attack against the crystalline barriers that protected the institution. From the central command chamber, Marcus coordinated a defense that defied every conventional military doctrine the assembled students and faculty had ever learned. Vex, take your team and reconfigure the sensor arrays. Marcus ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in real combat. I need you to create false readings that suggest our main defensive systems are failing. The Nexari's tentacles writhed with uncertainty. Admiral, that will invite them to press their attack more aggressively. That's exactly what I want them to do, Marcus replied, his fingers dancing across tactical displays that showed the approaching enemy formation. Lyra, can your team modify the Academy's communication systems to broadcast on Void Hunter frequencies? Theoretically, yes, she said, her luminescent skin flickering with concentration. But what do you want us to transmit? Marcus pulled up a series of tactical diagrams on the central holographic display. Fake command protocols. I want them to think they're intercepting communications between Academy defenses and incoming coalition reinforcements. Professor Valdris moved closer to study the diagrams, his obsidian features reflecting the blue glow of the holograms. Admiral, these tactical formations don't exist in any coalition database. They exist in my mind, Marcus said grimly. I've been developing contingency plans for this exact scenario since I arrived at the Academy. The Void Hunters have spent so much time studying our standard responses that they've made themselves vulnerable to innovations they've never encountered. The Academy shuddered as enemy fire found gaps in the defensive barriers. Through the massive viewports, they could see Void Hunter ships moving in precise formations that demonstrated their confidence in the outcome of this engagement. Sir, Commander Thex called from the Defensive Coordination Station. They're deploying boarding craft. Estimate 30 minutes until they reach the outer platforms. Marcus nodded, having anticipated this development. Thyra, are the evacuation routes ready? The crystalline Minervan's faceted features reflected her confusion. Admiral, you ordered us to prepare defensive positions, not evacuation routes. The evacuation routes are the defensive positions, Marcus explained, bringing up a three-dimensional map of the Academy's internal structure. We're going to let them board. The chamber fell silent except for the distant sounds of battle. Around him, Marcus could see expressions of shock and disbelief on faces from dozens of different species. Let them board? Jorik's massive frame shifted with agitation. That violates every principle of defensive warfare. It violates every principle of conventional defensive warfare, Marcus corrected. But conventional warfare is exactly what the Void Hunters are expecting. They've studied our responses to boarding actions, analyzed our defensive patterns, developed counters to our standard protocols. He activated a series of controls that began reconfiguring the Academy's internal layout. Blast doors sealed certain corridors while others opened passages that didn't appear on any official Academy blueprints. 6 months ago, when I first arrived here, I began preparing for this possibility, Marcus continued. The Academy structure can be reconfigured to create a maze that will channel boarding parties into predetermined zones. Once they're inside, they'll be fighting on terrain that I control. That's incredibly dangerous, Director Zalon's telepathic voice carried concern that transcended species boundaries. You're risking the lives of everyone in this Academy on an untested strategy. Marcus turned to face the assembled group, his expression carrying the weight of decisions that had shaped his entire career. I've been testing this strategy for months, running simulations that none of you knew about. Every evening when I claimed to be studying in the library, I was actually mapping defensive scenarios using the Academy's own security systems. Lyra stepped forward, her opalescent eyes reflecting new understanding. The classified protocols on your datapad, they weren't just research materials. They were contingency plans, Marcus confirmed. Detailed analyses of how to turn this Academy into the most sophisticated trap the Void Hunters have ever encountered. The tactical displays updated with new information as enemy boarding craft attached themselves to the Academy's outer structures. Marcus watched the deployment patterns with satisfaction, recognizing formations that matched his psychological profiles of Void Hunter tactical thinking. They're coming in exactly where I expected, he said. 3 main assault groups supported by smaller infiltration teams. Standard boarding doctrine designed to overwhelm defenders through multiple simultaneous penetrations. How do we counter that? Commander Thex asked. Marcus activated a series of hidden defensive systems that had been installed throughout the Academy, under cover of routine maintenance operations. We don't counter it. We guide it. The Academy's corridors began reconfiguring themselves in real time, creating pathways that seemed to offer easy access to critical areas while actually channeling the boarding parties toward positions. where Academy defenders would have every possible advantage. Teams 1 through 6, take positions at designated ambush points, Marcus ordered. Remember, we're not trying to stop them immediately. We're herding them into kill zones. This is insane, Vex muttered, but his multiple brain lobes were already processing the tactical implications of Marcus's strategy. You're using the entire Academy as a weapon. The Academy was always a weapon, Marcus replied. It's the center of coalition military education, the place where future fleet commanders learn their trade. The Void Hunters understand that destroying it would cripple our ability to train effective leaders. But they're not here to destroy it, Lyra realized. They're here to capture you. Marcus nodded, his attention focused on tracking the enemy forces now moving through the Academy's lower levels. Which means they need me alive. That requirement creates limitations they haven't fully considered. The first contact between Academy defenders and Void Hunter boarding parties came sooner than expected. Reports flooded in from teams positioned throughout the complex, painting a picture of enemy forces that were moving with confidence bordering on arrogance. They're not even scanning for traps, reported Thyra from her position near the main library. They're advancing as if they expect minimal resistance. Because they do expect minimal resistance, Marcus said. Their intelligence suggests this is an academic institution with minimal defensive capabilities. They have no idea that every student and faculty member here has been training for this moment. What the Void Hunters didn't know was that Marcus had spent his months at the Academy doing more than just maintaining cover. He had been quietly training the students and faculty in advanced combat techniques, disguising the lessons as theoretical exercises and simulation scenarios. Every tactical analysis session had been a disguised briefing on enemy capabilities. Every strategic discussion had been preparation for real combat. Every simulation exercise had been rehearsal for the battle they were now fighting. Admiral, Commander Thex called from the Central Coordination Station. The enemy commander is requesting communication. Marcus wasn't surprised. The Void Hunters' tactical doctrine included psychological warfare components, attempts to demoralize defenders through threats or false promises of mercy. Put them through, he said, his voice carrying calm confidence that he hoped would be transmitted to every defender position throughout the Academy. The holographic display flickered, and the image of a Void Hunter commander appeared in the center of the chamber. The aliens' features were hidden behind the characteristic black armor that made their species so feared across the galaxy, but Marcus could read the confidence in its posture. Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen, the commander said, its voice carrying the mechanical distortion typical of Void Hunter communication systems. We offer terms for your surrender. I'm listening, Marcus replied, though his hands continued working the tactical displays to track enemy positions throughout the Academy. You will come with us voluntarily, the commander continued. In exchange, we will spare the lives of the students and faculty. Refuse, and we will execute everyone in this facility before taking you by force. Marcus studied the tactical situation for a moment before responding. The enemy forces were now positioned exactly where his contingency plans had anticipated they would be. The trap was ready to spring. I have a counteroffer, he said, his voice carrying subtle menace that made several students look at him with new understanding. You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawing your forces before I demonstrate why the Void Hunters have never successfully captured a human fleet commander. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sounds of movement as Academy defenders prepared to implement tactics that would redefine the meaning of defensive warfare among the stars. The Void Hunter commander's mechanical laughter echoed through the Academy's communication system. Your reputation for arrogance is well documented, Admiral Chen, but you are trapped in an academic facility with student defenders against a force that has studied every aspect of your tactical methodology. Marcus smiled, an expression that seemed to carry more menace than humor. You've studied my documented tactics. What you haven't studied are the innovations I've been developing specifically for this encounter. He activated a control sequence that had been hidden within the Academy's systems for months. Throughout the complex, automated defenses came online that didn't appear in any official Academy blueprints. The Void Hunter boarding party suddenly found themselves facing resistance that transformed familiar corridors into deadly mazes. Now, Marcus said quietly into his communication system. The Academy erupted into coordinated chaos as students and faculty implemented defensive strategies, that defied every conventional military doctrine the Void Hunters had studied. Instead of holding defensive positions, the Academy's defenders moved through the complex like flowing water, appearing where the enemy least expected them and vanishing before effective countermeasures could be deployed. Lyra's team had done more than modify the communication systems. They had turned the Academy's entire information network into a weapon. False sensor readings confused Void Hunter forces about defender positions, while accurate intelligence flowed to Academy personnel through channels the enemy couldn't detect or intercept. Section 7 reports enemy forces neutralized. Came Thyra's voice over the communication system. They walked directly into a crossfire position, thinking they were flanking our main defensive line. Section 12 is executing Phase 3 withdrawal. Reported. Vex. Enemy pursuit forces are following exactly the predicted path toward the central trap. Marcus watched the tactical displays with satisfaction as the Void Hunter forces found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. The psychological profiles he had developed during months of studying enemy combat recordings were proving accurate in ways that exceeded his expectations. Admiral, Commander Thex called from his coordination station. The enemy commander is attempting to recall his boarding parties. Too late, Marcus replied. Activating the final phase of his defensive strategy, initiate lockdown protocols. Throughout the Academy, blast doors sealed simultaneously, trapping Void Hunter forces in sections where they could be dealt with systematically. The enemy had entered the Academy confident in their ability to overwhelm academic defenses, but now they found themselves isolated in a facility that had become a three-dimensional battlefield designed specifically to neutralize their tactical advantages. This is impossible, the Void Hunter commander's voice carried genuine confusion. Our intelligence indicated minimal defensive capabilities. Your intelligence was accurate 6 months ago, Marcus replied. What you failed to account for was the possibility that someone might use those 6 months to transform an academic institution into the most sophisticated fortress in coalition space. In the battle that followed, demonstrated the difference between studying tactics and understanding the mind that created them. The Void Hunters had analyzed Marcus's previous battles with scientific precision, developing counters to his documented strategies and responses to his known tactical preferences. But Marcus had been analyzing them just as intensively, studying their methods and psychological patterns while developing approaches that existed outside their analytical framework. Every innovation he had implemented at the Academy was designed to exploit weaknesses in Void Hunter, thinking that they didn't even know they possessed. Section 4 reports all enemy forces neutralized, came Jorik's triumphant voice. The trap in the engineering levels worked perfectly. Academy perimeter reports. Enemy ships beginning to withdraw, added another voice from the defensive coordination team. Marcus studied the tactical displays showing the retreat of the Void Hunter fleet. Their withdrawal wasn't the chaotic flight of defeated forces. It was the careful extraction of a reconnaissance mission that had gathered valuable data despite its tactical failure. They're not retreating because we defeated them, he said to the assembled defenders. They're retreating because they got what they came for. What do you mean? Lyra asked, her luminescent features reflecting confusion. They didn't come here to capture me, Marcus realized, understanding flooding through him as he analyzed the enemy's actual behavior patterns. They came here to test me under controlled conditions, to see how I would respond when defending a fixed position with non-military personnel. The implications of this realization sent a chill through the command chamber. If Marcus was correct, the attack on the Academy hadn't been an extraction operation at all. It had been the largest field test the Void Hunters had yet conducted. Sir, Commander Thex said grimly, if they were testing your defensive capabilities here, then they're preparing for a much larger engagement, where those capabilities will be critical, Marcus finished. They needed to understand how I would adapt coalition tactics when fighting from a disadvantageous position. Director Zalan's telepathic voice carried new understanding. The Academy attack was preparation for an assault on Earth itself. Marcus felt the weight of this conclusion settling on his shoulders. The Void Hunters hadn't been trying to capture him to eliminate his tactical innovations from coalition forces. They had been studying those innovations to prepare for a final confrontation where his defensive strategies would be the last barrier between humanity and extinction. "Admiral," Lyra said quietly, "what do we do now?" Marcus looked around the command chamber at the faces of students and faculty who had just proven themselves capable of fighting and defeating an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for years. Representatives of dozens of species who had worked together to implement tactics that none of them fully understood, trusting in innovations that challenged everything they had been taught about warfare. "Now we prepare the galaxy for what's coming," he said, "because the Void Hunters aren't done studying us. This was just the final examination before the real test begins." He activated his communication systems to contact Admiral Sarah Chen and Coalition High Command. The months of maintaining cover at the Academy were over, but the mission that had brought him here was just beginning. The galaxy needed to understand that human tactical innovations weren't primitive brute force approaches to warfare. They were sophisticated responses to enemies that required new ways of thinking about conflict among the stars. And if the Coalition was going to survive what the Void Hunters were planning, every species in the galactic community would need to learn how to fight like humans. "This is Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen," he said into the communication system. "Mission parameters have changed. Request immediate authorization to begin training Coalition forces in advanced human tactical doctrine." As acknowledgments began flowing in from across the galaxy, Marcus realized that his time as a silent observer was truly over. The Academy had become the first school where alien species learned to fight with human innovation and determination. But it wouldn't be the last. The real war was just beginning, and humanity's greatest weapon wouldn't be superior firepower or advanced technology. It would be the ability to adapt, innovate, and find victory in situations where defeat seemed inevitable. The galaxy was about to learn what it really meant when humans refused to accept surrender as an option. Outside the Academy's viewports, the last Void Hunter ships disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with them data that would reshape the coming conflict. But they also left behind something they hadn't expected: a coalition that now understood the true capabilities of their human allies. The silent student had finally spoken, and his voice would echo across the galaxy in the battles yet to come.